In the 41st millennium, humanity has catalogued 10,000 Xenos threats, classified nightmares beyond counting, and survived horrors that would shatter lesser species. The Imperium's vast archives contain strategic data on demon princes, Citan shards, and reality-warping abominations that defy the laws of physics itself. Yet for all their grim experience, for all their bloody wisdom earned across 1,000,000 burning worlds, there exists no protocol, no contingency, for what happens when something crashes through the skin of reality that predates human civilization entirely. The Tyranids had come to feast. They would learn that some prey fights back. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions, where ancient titans reshape the battlefield of the 41st millennium, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to monsters beyond imagining. The agri-world of Tertius Sigma had 22 billion souls when the Astronomicon readings went dark. Governor Malthius had seen the reports. Every planetary administrator in the segmentum received the same grim briefing. Hive Fleet Jormungandr had devoured 6 systems in as many months, leaving only scoured rocks where civilizations once thrived. The Tyranid swarm moved with horrifying purpose, and Tertius Sigma lay directly in its feeding path. Lord General Crassus of the 44th Cadian Regiment had arrived 3 weeks earlier with 15 million guardsmen, 600 Lehman Russ battle tanks, and a prayer to the God Emperor that it would be enough. It wouldn't be. Everyone knew it. The planet's sprawling grain fields and protein farms stretched across 3 continents, a buffet of biomass waiting to be consumed and rendered into more Tyranid creatures. Evacuation was impossible at this scale. They would fight, they would die, and perhaps they would buy time for the neighboring systems to fortify. Then the sky tore open. It happened at 0347 hours, 3 days before the Tyranid vanguard organisms were projected to make atmospheric entry. Crassus stood in the command bunker 17 kilometers outside Hive Primus, reviewing defensive positions on a crackling hololithic display, when every auger array in the facility shrieked simultaneous alarm. Seismic sensors registered an impact event equivalent to a cyclonic torpedo strike, except nothing had been detected entering orbit. "Report!" Crassus barked, his weathered face illuminated by flashing red emergency lumens. Tech Adept Viridia's mechadendrites twitched spasmodically as she interfaced with the sensor network. "My lord, the auger returns are contradictory. Massive thermal signature. Radioactive signature exceeds measurement capacity. Geological displacement indicates crater formation 30 kilometers in diameter." Her organic eye widened, the augmetic one focusing and refocusing as if unable to process what it registered. "Biological reading detected. Single organism. Mass equivalent to an Emperor-class battleship." Silence filled the command bunker like a held breath. "Repeat that last part, Tech Adept," Crassus said quietly. "1 organism, Lord General, and it's moving." The crater lay in the Ashenvale region, a coastal territory where thermal vents fed algae farms that processed nutrients for 3 hive cities. The impact had vaporized 40 square kilometers of cultivation facilities and flash-boiled an inland sea. Recon Valkyries scrambled at first light, their pilots veterans of a dozen war zones, men who had seen demons crawl from the warp and watched cities burn under orbital bombardment. None of them were prepared for what they found. Flight Commander Sorvis activated his Vox with hands that had started to shake. "Command, this is Recon 7. I have visual on the target. Emperor, preserve us." "Recon 7. Describe what you're seeing." Crassus's voice remained steady, but his knuckles had gone white, gripping the Vox receiver. "It's standing in the crater, Lord General. Roughly 120 meters tall, bipedal, dorsal structures along the spine emitting visible radiation. Coloration appears black with blue bioluminescent patterns." Sorvis's voice cracked. "It's looking at us, sir. Directly at us. I'm pulling back before—" The transmission dissolved into static, punctuated by a sound that no human ear was designed to process. It started as a subsonic rumble that made teeth ache and organs vibrate, then rose to a primal roar that transcended mere noise and became a physical force. The sound wave shattered windows in settlements 30 kilometers away. Seismographs registered it as a magnitude 3.5 earthquake, and every living thing that heard it understood, on an instinctual level older than language, that an apex predator had just announced its presence. In his command bunker, Lord General Crassus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. A response he'd thought he'd conquered decades ago. Around him, veteran guardsmen had gone pale. Several made the sign of the Aquila with trembling hands. "Sir," Viridia said, her mechanical voice somehow steadier than the humans around her, "I'm detecting additional atmospheric disturbances. Multiple contacts entering the upper atmosphere. Organic signatures consistent with—" She paused, processing data. "Consistent with Tyranid mycetic spores. Vanguard organisms making planetfall. Approximately 400 contacts. Dispersed landing pattern." Crassus watched the hololithic display update with red icons representing Tyranid landing zones. They formed a loose perimeter around the major hive cities, standard Tyranid infiltration doctrine. Lictors and genestealers would go to ground, begin seeding cults, destabilizing infrastructure. The main fleet would arrive within days. Then he noticed something peculiar. None of the Tyranid landing zones were within 50 kilometers of the crater. They'd formed a cordon around it, but maintained distance. "They're avoiding it," he said aloud. "The Tyranids are avoiding the creature." Before anyone could respond, the seismic sensors flared again. The creature was moving. Satellite picts showed it emerging from the crater, each footfall registering as a minor tremor. It moved with surprising speed for something so massive, and its trajectory was unmistakable. It was heading directly toward the nearest cluster of Tyranid landing sites. Crassus felt a grim smile touch his lips. He'd spent 40 years fighting the enemies of mankind, heretics who betrayed the Emperor's light, orcs who lived for savage warfare, demons that defied sanity itself. He'd learned to recognize patterns, to read the battlefield with an instinct that transcended tactical doctrine. And what he saw now was simple. 2 predators had just been dropped into the same territory. Only one would leave alive. "Order all units to defensive positions," he commanded. "Priority 1, Fortify the hive cities. Priority 2. Establish observation posts with long-range augers focused on the creature and Tyranid landing zones. Priority 3. Get me an astropathic relay to Fleet Command immediately. Tell them we have a developing situation. Tech Adept Viridia tilted her head. What classification should I assign to the creature? Lord General? Crassus watched the satellite feed as the massive being's dorsal plates began to glow with increasing intensity, casting blue-white light across the scorched landscape. Somewhere in the distance, Tyranid organisms were regrouping, preparing to fulfill their biological imperative to consume and adapt. Classification: Apex, Crassus said, and pray to the Emperor that it's hungry. The first Tyranid organisms to encounter the creature were a reconnaissance brood, 3 lictors, and a pack of 8 genestealers. They had emerged from their mycetic spore 37 kilometers from the crater site, immediately burrowing into the dense undergrowth of Tertius Sigma's equatorial forests. Lictors were apex ambush predators in their own right, bioengineered by the hive mind for stealth assassination and intelligence gathering. Their chameleonic skin rendered them nearly invisible, their feeder tendrils capable of extracting memories from prey, while their talons could pierce ceramite armor. They had hunted space marines. They had stalked Tau battlesuits. They had killed Elder Farseers before the Xenos could perceive the future. They survived exactly 4 minutes after detecting the creature's approach. Lord General Crassus watched the encounter through a recon drone's grainy pict feed, the timestamp burning in the corner of the display. 0823 hours, day 1 of contact. The lictors had positioned themselves in a perfect ambush formation, using the forest canopy and a ravine's natural cover. The genestealers spread in a crescent pattern, ready to flank. Textbook Tyranid tactics, refined across 1,000 worlds. Then the creature entered the kill zone, and tactics became irrelevant. It moved through the forest like a walking earthquake, each step toppling trees that had stood for centuries. The dorsal plates along its spine pulsed with bioluminescent blue light, and Crassus noticed something that made his tactical instincts scream warning. The creature wasn't hunting blindly. Its massive head swiveled with deliberate precision, scanning the terrain with an intelligence that belied its monstrous appearance. "It knows they're there," Captain Dren muttered, the company commander having joined Crassus in the observation room. "How does it know?" Tech Adept Viridia's mechadendrites interfaced with the sensor suite. "I'm detecting electromagnetic field distortions emanating from the creature's cranial region. Hypothesis: it possesses a sensory organ capable of detecting bioelectric signatures at range. The Tyranid organisms emit distinct neural patterns. The creature may be tracking their synaptic connections." The first lictor struck from above, launching itself from a tree with its rending claws extended toward the creature's eye. It was a perfect kill strike, executed with the precision of a weapon system designed by the hive mind itself. The creature's hand moved with impossible speed for something so massive. It caught the lictor mid-air, fingers closing around the Tyranid's body. For a moment, the organism struggled, talons scraping uselessly against hide that registered harder than starship armor plating on the drone's analysis readout. Then the creature squeezed, and the lictor simply ruptured. Bioacids sprayed across armored scales and sizzled harmlessly. The creature dropped the corpse and opened its jaws. The roar that emerged made the previous territorial call sound like a whisper. This was something else entirely. A challenge, a promise, a declaration of absolute dominance. The sound wave was visible on thermal imaging as a cone of superheated air. Trees ignited spontaneously. The remaining two lictors, their chameleonic skin flickering as neural shock disrupted their camouflage, were flash-cooked where they crouched. The genestealers, driven by synaptic imperatives that overrode even self-preservation, charged as a unified swarm. They didn't even reach the creature before the air itself turned lethal. The dorsal plates along the creature's spine flared brilliant blue-white, and Crassus watched in stunned silence as the atmospheric radiation levels spiked beyond measurement. The genestealer's chitin began to smoke, their flesh sloughing off bones that themselves crumbled to ash within seconds. 8 perfect killing machines, bioforms refined across millennia of evolution, reduced to radioactive vapor in the time it took to draw breath. Emperor's throne, Dren whispered. What in terror's name is that thing? Crassus didn't answer. He was too busy recalculating everything he thought he knew about the situation. This wasn't just a large creature. This was something that operated on principles that defied Imperial categorization. It radiated death as naturally as a star radiated light. And it had just demonstrated that Tyranid bioforms, organisms designed to adapt and overcome any threat, were less than insects before it. The Voxnet erupted with reports from observation posts across the planet. 23 separate encounters had occurred within the first 6 hours. The pattern was consistent. Tyranid vanguard organisms approached the creature, either attempting to assess it as prey or eliminate it as a threat. None survived contact. But the truly disturbing development came from Tech Adept Viridia's analysis. Lord General, she said, her mechadendrite stylus scratching across a data slate. The creature's radiation output is increasing exponentially with each encounter. Initial readings placed it at approximately 40,000 Roentgens per hour. Current readings exceed 300,000 Roentgens per hour. At this rate of acceleration, it's feeding on them, Crassus interrupted, understanding crystallizing, or feeding on something about the combat. Every fight makes it stronger. Affirmative. Additionally, the Tyranid landing patterns are adapting. New spore clusters are avoiding zones within a 100-kilometer radius of the creature's position. The hive mind has recognized it as a threat. Captain Dren leaned forward, studying the hololithic display. They're going to throw bigger organisms at it. Test its capabilities with expendable units first. Then commit warrior forms once they understand what they're facing. Standard doctrine, Crassus agreed, which means we're about to see what happens when the Tyranids actually try to kill it. The answer came at 1447 hours. 17 mycetic spores burned through the atmosphere in a coordinated drop, their trajectory calculated to create an encirclement around the creature's projected path. Crassus watched the descent on multiple feeds, his experienced eye noting the precision. This wasn't random seeding. The hive mind was deploying a strike force. The spores cracked open like obscene eggs, disgorging their contents onto the ash-grey plains where the creature had been systematically hunting scattered Tyranid broods. 30 Tyranid warriors emerged first, each standing 3 meters tall, their upper arms ending in bone swords and death spitters. Behind them came 6 carnifexes, living battering rams sheathed in adamantium-hard carapace plates, biocannons grafted to their backs. And finally, towering over even the carnifexes, came a Trigon Prime, a serpentine nightmare designed to tunnel through bedrock and emerge in the heart of enemy formations. Its bioelectric aura crackled visibly even through the drone's pict feed. The creature stopped walking. Its massive head swiveled, taking in the force arrayed against it. For a moment, silence stretched across the battlefield, that terrible pause before armies collide that Crassus had experienced 100 times. Then the creature's dorsal plates began to glow. Not the steady pulse from before, but an intensifying radiance that built like a reactor approaching critical mass. The blue-white light became painful to look at, even through filtered pict feeds. Atmospheric moisture vaporized in an expanding sphere around the creature's body. The Tyranids charged. 30 warriors fired as they advanced, flesh-borer beetles and bioplasma streaking across the distance. The carnifexes thundered forward with earth-shaking momentum. The Trigon Prime's bioelectric discharge arced through the air, a lance of organic lightning designed to fry tank crews in their vehicles. The creature opened its jaws, and hell itself poured forth. The atomic breath wasn't fire. Fire was a crude chemical reaction that paled before this. What erupted from the creature's maw was a concentrated beam of thermonuclear energy, a column of superheated plasma that registered on thermal sensors as exceeding 30,000 degrees. It swept across the battlefield in a horizontal arc, and where it touched, matter ceased to exist in recognizable form. The Trigon Prime, with all its bioengineered resilience and redundant organ systems, simply vaporized. The carnifexes behind it had time for their nervous systems to register agony before their bodies flash-boiled from the inside. The Tyranid warriors attempted to scatter, their enhanced reflexes buying them precious microseconds of life before the atomic breath consumed them entirely. In 15 seconds, 37 Tyranid organisms, representing millions of biomass worth of the Hive Fleet's resources, became radioactive glass fused into the planet's surface. The creature closed its jaws. The glow in its dorsal plates dimmed slightly, but Crassus noticed the atmospheric radiation had spiked to levels that would kill unprotected humans in minutes. A 50-kilometer radius around the creature was now a fallout zone. Captain Dren made the sign of the Aquila. "We're not fighting the Tyranids anymore, Lord General. We're spectators watching Titans battle." Crassus studied the tactical display, his mind racing through scenarios and counter-scenarios. The Hive Fleet would arrive in full force within 48 hours. When it did, the hive mind would commit resources on a scale that dwarfed this skirmish. Millions of organisms, bio-titans, perhaps even the hive ships themselves descending into atmosphere. "Get me an open vox to all command elements," he ordered, "and someone find me everything we have on ancient Terran mythology. Something about this creature feels familiar." As tech adept Viridia worked her console, Crassus watched the creature resume its methodical march across the planet's surface, its path unwavering toward the largest concentration of Tyranid landing sites. It moved with purpose, with terrible certainty. It moved like a king reclaiming stolen territory. The hive mind's response came 36 hours later, and it came with the cold mathematical precision that had consumed 1,000 worlds. Lord General Crassus stood in the command bunker, watching orbital augurs track the massive shadow descending through Tertius Sigma's upper atmosphere. The main Hive Fleet had arrived, not in full strength, but a substantial tendril diverted specifically to address what the Tyranids now clearly recognized as an existential threat to their harvest. Augur readings confirm 47 bioships entering high orbit. Tech Adept Viridia reported, her mechanical voice somehow conveying urgency. Lead vessel classified as a Hive Ship, mass equivalent to an Emperor-class battleship. Deploying secondary vessels, Kraken-class cruiser analogues, escort organisms, and... She paused, her organic eye widening. Lord General, detecting multiple Harridan drops, 16 confirmed contacts. Captain Dren cursed under his breath. Harridans were flying monstrosities, winged bio-titans capable of carrying gargoyle broods and providing air superiority. 16 of them represented an aerial armada. But Crassus's attention remained fixed on the Hive Ship itself. The Tyranids didn't commit vessels of that magnitude lightly. Hive ships were strategic assets, mobile gene forges capable of rapidly evolving new bioforms in response to threats. They were also psychic nexuses, amplifying the hive mind's control over lesser organisms. The Tyranids weren't testing anymore. They were coming to kill. The creature, Crassus had taken to thinking of it simply as the apex, had continued its methodical extermination of vanguard organisms. In 36 hours, it had killed an estimated 400 Tyranid bioforms ranging from Hormagaunts to a Maleceptor that had attempted a psychic assault. The psychic backlash from the Maleceptor's death had registered on astropathic sensors, a psychic scream that suggested the creature possessed not just physical might, but some form of mental or spiritual resistance that defied the hive mind's influence. It currently stood in the ruins of Processing Station Gamma 7, a promethium refinery that had been overrun by Genistealers 12 hours prior. The creature had tracked them to their nest and collapsed the entire facility with seismic impacts from its footfalls. Now it stood amid the rubble, its dorsal plates pulsing with that steady blue-white luminescence, as if waiting. Crassus realized with cold certainty that it was waiting. The apex had learned the pattern. Tyranids arrived. Apex destroyed them. More Tyranids arrived. It had stopped hunting scattered broods and positioned itself in an open killing ground. It was daring them to come. Mycetic spore drops commencing, Viridia announced. Multiple impact points converging on the apex's position. Estimate 400 individual spores. This is a coordinated assault, Lord General. Through dozens of drone feeds, Crassus watched the sky darken with falling spores. They descended in waves, the first striking ground 3 kilometers from the apex in a loose encirclement. The spores cracked open with wet, organic sounds, that the audio pickups translated into nightmarish squelches. What emerged made the previous assault look like a probing skirmish. 200 Jormungandrs poured from their spores in a chittering tide, their blade arms glinting in the harsh sunlight. Behind them came 60 Tyranid warriors, already firing their bioweapons in coordinated volleys. 12 Carnifexes thundered forward, accompanied by screamer killers, variants equipped with enhanced biocannons. 3 Tyrannifexes, massive siege organisms, deployed their rupture cannons, and circling overhead, the Harridans screeched their alien cries while deploying gargoyle broods that darkened the sky like locusts. The apex tilted its head back and roared. The sound wave shattered 2 observation drones immediately, their systems overloading. The seismic sensors registered a magnitude 4.2 event from the vocalization alone. Then the creature began to glow. The bioluminescence in its dorsal plates intensified to levels that forced the remaining drones to adjust their visual filters. Atmospheric temperature readings spiked. The air itself was ionizing around the creature's body. Crassus watched the radiation counter climb. 500,000 Roentgens, 700,000, 1 million. That level of radiation should be killing it, Captain Dren said, his voice barely audible over the klaxons blaring warnings throughout the command bunker. Nothing biological can survive that level of exposure. It's not surviving the radiation, Crassus said, understanding crystallizing. It's generating it. The radiation is its weapon. The Jormungandrs hit first, a living wave of chitin and claws that could overwhelm space marine positions through sheer ferocity. They swarmed toward the apex with bio-engineered speed, closing the distance in seconds. The creature took a single step forward, and the shockwave from its footfall sent dozens of Jormungandrs tumbling. It swept its tail in a horizontal arc, and the bioorganisms caught in the strike simply disintegrated. The kinetic force exceeded their structural tolerance by orders of magnitude. But there were too many. They swarmed up its legs, claws finding purchase in the armored hide, climbing toward vulnerable points. Then the creature's entire body pulsed with brilliant blue light, and every Jormungandr within 50 meters began to smoke. Their chitin cracked and blackened, flesh cooking inside their own exoskeletons. They fell in waves, victims of radiation so intense it bypassed conventional biology entirely. The Tyranid warriors opened fire with concentrated volleys. Flesh borer beetles impacted the creature's hide and burrowed. These weapons were designed to tunnel through armor and detonate inside targets. Bioplasma washed over its torso in streams of corrosive organic matter. Death spitter rounds exploded against its dorsal plates. The apex registered the attacks with the same concern a human might give to mosquito bites. It opened its jaws and swept its atomic breath across the warrior formations, in a sustained beam that turned sand to glass and air to plasma. 20 warriors vaporized instantly. The survivors scattered, their synaptic coordination disrupted by the sheer brutality of casualties. The Carnifexes charged, living battering rams designed to shatter fortifications. They slammed into the creature with impacts that registered on seismic sensors across the continent. The apex staggered, the first time Crassus had seen it show any reaction to damage. One Carnifex managed to gore its leg with crushing claws, tearing through scales and drawing blood that glowed faintly blue. The creature's response was immediate and overwhelming. It seized the offending carnifex by its carapace, lifted the multi-ton organism overhead with arms that functioned like industrial cranes, and brought it down across its knee. The crack of shattering chitin was audible even through the drone feeds. The apex hurled the broken body into two more carnifexes, sending them tumbling. Then it vented heat. The dorsal plates flared so bright that the drone feeds whited out completely for 3 seconds. When the visual returned, Crassus saw a hemisphere of superheated air expanding from the creature's body, a thermal shockwave that flash-burned everything within 100 meters. The remaining carnifexes collapsed, their internal organs cooked to ash. The ground itself had turned to molten glass, but the tyrannifexes had positioned at range, and now they fired. Rupture cannons, bioweapons designed to crack open bunkers, launched projectiles that detonated with seismic force. The first round caught the apex in the torso, the bioacid payload eating through layers of armored hide. The second struck its shoulder. The third hit its head, and for the first time, the creature staggered backward. Captain Dren leaned forward. "They're hurting it? Actually hurting it?" The apex shook its massive head, blue blood streaming from wounds that already showed signs of regeneration. Its eyes, Crassus could see them clearly now on the magnified feed, burned with something that transcended animal fury. This was intelligence. This was rage with purpose behind it. The creature's dorsal plates began to glow with an intensity that made all previous displays look like smoldering coals. The atmospheric radiation readings climbed beyond measurement capacity. Thermal sensors registered heat levels approaching the core temperature of a plasma reactor. "It's going critical," Tech Adept Viridia said, her voice tight with alarm. "Energy buildup consistent with catastrophic overload." The apex's jaws opened, but what emerged wasn't the sustained beam from before. This was a spiral of thermonuclear fury, a concentrated lance of atomic fire that carved through the air like a god's spear. It struck the nearest Tyrannifex dead center, and the organism didn't vaporize. It simply ceased to exist. Atoms torn apart by forces that belonged in the heart of stars. The beam swept across the battlefield in a scything arc. The second Tyrannifex exploded in a spray of superheated biomass. The third attempted to burrow, its instincts screaming for escape, but the atomic breath punched through 20 meters of bedrock and incinerated it in its tunnel. Above, the Harridans dove in coordinated attack runs, their sonic screams meant to disorient prey. They released their gargoyle broods, hundreds of flying Tyranids that descended in a living cloud. The apex tracked them with its eyes, and then it did something Crassus hadn't seen before. The dorsal plates pulsed in sequence, and an electromagnetic pulse radiated outward. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but its effects were immediate. The gargoyles' wings seized mid-beat, their bioelectric nervous systems scrambled by the interference. They fell from the sky like rain, bodies broken on impact. The Harridans, larger and more resilient, survived the EMP but found themselves facing something new. The apex crouched, an action that seemed impossible for something so massive, and launched itself skyward. Crassus watched in disbelief as the creature achieved a vertical leap of over 200 meters, propelled by leg muscles that functioned like organic mass drivers. It caught a Harridan mid-flight, jaws clamping around the bio-titan's neck. They fell together, a spinning tangle of flesh and fury, and hit the ground with an impact that registered as a magnitude 5.6 earthquake. The Harridan thrashed, trying to bring its crushing claws to bear, but the apex's grip was absolute. Blue-white energy gathered in the creature's throat, visible through translucent flesh, and then erupted point blank. The Harridan's head and upper torso simply vanished in a gout of nuclear fire. The remaining Harridans pulled up and away, their biological imperatives momentarily overridden by something approaching fear. But the hive mind was absolute. They dove again, coordinating their approach to strike from multiple angles simultaneously. The apex met them with atomic breath that swept the sky like searchlight beams from hell. 3 Harridans fell burning. 2 more closed the distance and raked their claws across the creature's back, drawing blue luminescent blood. The apex spun with shocking speed and caught one in its jaws, biting clean through the bio-titan's thorax before hurling the corpse into its companion. In 47 minutes of sustained combat, the Tyranids lost over 400 organisms, including strategic assets that represented years of biomass accumulation. The killing ground around the apex had become a charnel house of charred chitin and radioactive slag. The atmospheric fallout was creating a dead zone that would take decades to decontaminate. And the creature stood at the center of it all, bleeding from a dozen wounds but very much alive, its dorsal plates pulsing with steady blue light as its regenerative systems worked to repair damage. It tilted its head back and roared. Not a challenge this time, but a declaration of victory. In the command bunker, Lord General Crassus made a decision that would haunt him for whatever remained of his life. Open a Vox channel to all Imperial forces, he ordered. New strategic directive. All units are to maintain defensive positions around population centers. Do not engage either hostile force. Repeat, do not engage. Let the monsters kill each other. Captain Dren stared at him. Sir, we're just going to watch? Captain, we've lost 15% of our forces trying to establish forward positions that both the Tyranids and that thing have walked through like they weren't there. Our weapons barely scratch it. The Tyranids are throwing warrior organisms at it that would require sustained orbital bombardment to eliminate, and it's killing them with contemptuous ease. Crassus gestured to the hololithic display showing casualty projections. Right now, we have 2 existential threats on this planet, but they're focused on each other. The moment we insert ourselves into that equation, we become targets for whichever one wins. And if they both survive? Crassus looked at the pict feed showing the apex beginning to move again, tracking toward the next concentration of Tyranid organisms with relentless purpose. Then we pray to the Emperor that one of them leaves when the fighting's done. The hive mind's strategy shifted in response to catastrophic losses. Lord General Crassus recognized the adaptation within hours. The Tyranids stopped committing ground forces in massed frontal assaults and began implementing something far more insidious. The orbital augurs tracked bioships repositioning, not for direct engagement, but for encirclement and atmospheric saturation. They're seeding the entire planetary surface. Tech Adept Viridia reported her mechadendrites flowing across multiple data streams simultaneously. Spore mine dispersal across 6 continents. Capillary towers breaking ground in 17 locations. They're transitioning from combat operations to full harvest protocol. Captain Dren studied the hololithic display with mounting dread. They're going around it. If they can't kill the apex directly, they'll consume the planet out from under it. Crassus nodded grimly. Capillary towers were the Tyranids' most efficient biomass extraction method. Organic structures that punched through a planet's crust and began converting all biological matter into a digestible slurry that would be pumped into orbit for the Hive ships to consume. Once enough towers achieved full deployment, the atmosphere itself would become toxic with spores and digestive aerosols. The planet had perhaps 72 hours before the process became irreversible. The apex, standing in the radioactive wasteland that had once been the Ashenvale industrial sector, seemed to sense the shift in tactics. Crassus watched through drone feeds as the massive creature's posture changed. Its head swiveled slowly, scanning the horizon in multiple directions. The dorsal plates pulsed with irregular patterns, not the steady rhythm of idle radiation emission, but something that looked almost like processing, thinking. "It's analyzing the situation," Crassus said quietly. "Look at the movement patterns. It's not just hunting anymore. It's assessing the strategic picture." The creature began to move, but not toward the nearest Tyranid concentration. Instead, it turned northwest, toward the coast where the first capillary tower had broken through the ocean floor and was beginning to extend its tendrils across the continental shelf. Each step measured, deliberate, purposeful. Radiation readings from the apex are climbing again, Viridia noted. Currently at 1.3 million Rontgens and increasing. Thermal signature suggests internal energy buildup. The journey took 6 hours. The creature moved through terrain with single-minded determination, ignoring scattered Tyranid organisms that attempted harassment. Hormigant packs that tried to slow its progress were crushed underfoot or vaporized with concentrated bursts of atomic breath. A Morlock that erupted from beneath its path was seized before it could retreat and torn in half, the creature consuming part of the biomass before discarding the rest, a gesture that sent ripples of alarm through the hive mind's tactical response. It was learning, adapting, taking sustenance from its enemies. The first capillary tower stood 300 meters tall, a grotesque pillar of chitin and pulsing flesh that had already begun spreading its root tendrils across 50 square kilometers of ocean floor. Tyranid bioships in low orbit pumped genetic material into the structure, accelerating its growth. Within 12 hours, it would achieve full operational status and begin the irreversible harvest. The apex approached from the shoreline, seawater boiling away from the heat radiating off its body. For a moment, it stood motionless, perhaps calculating, perhaps simply preparing. Then its dorsal plates flared with brilliant intensity, and it opened its jaws. The atomic breath that emerged wasn't a sustained beam this time. It was a focused pulse, a concentrated lance of thermonuclear energy that struck the capillary tower's base with pinpoint precision. The structure shuddered. Biomatter flash vaporized. The tower's regenerative systems attempted to compensate, but the apex maintained the assault, pouring megawatts of thermal energy into a single focal point. The tower collapsed. 70,000 tons of Tyranid bioarchitecture crashed into the ocean, creating a tsunami that devastated 300 kilometers of coastline. The shockwave registered on seismographs globally. Crassus allowed himself a thin smile. It understands infrastructure. It's not just fighting the organisms, it's disrupting their strategic assets. But the hive mind was already adapting. Across the planet, 16 more capillary towers accelerated their deployment schedules. The bioships in orbit began descending lower, providing direct biomass infusions to bypass ground-level vulnerabilities. And they committed something new to the battlefield, something that made even Crassus's veteran instincts scream alarm. Bio-Titan contact, Viridia announced, her voice tight. Hierophant class. Descending directly toward the apex's position. The Hierophant was a living siege engine, a bio-titan that stood nearly as tall as the apex itself. Its 6 limbs could shatter bunkers, its bio-cannons could level city blocks, and its armored carapace had been refined across countless battlefields to resist everything from plasma weapons to melter charges. The hive mind deployed them rarely, each one representing a massive resource investment. The Tyranids were committing assets normally reserved for cracking fortress worlds. The Hierophant made planetfall 8 kilometers from the apex position, its impact creating a crater and kicking up a dust cloud visible from orbit. It emerged from the debris with alien grace, sensors locking onto its target immediately. Behind it, support organisms deployed, carnifexes, screamer killers, and venomthropes, whose toxic spores began saturating the battlefield. The apex turned to face the new threat. For the first time since its arrival, Crassus saw something that might have been recognition in the creature's posture. This wasn't prey. This was a rival apex predator, a being that operated at a comparable scale of destructive capacity. The two titans began to circle each other across the devastated landscape, each step a controlled earthquake. The Hierophant's biocannons tracked the apex's movement, while smaller organisms began closing the encirclement. The venomthrope's spore clouds drifted on thermal currents, creating zones of toxic miasma. The Hierophant struck first. All 6 of its biocannons fired simultaneously, launching clusters of bioplasma and razor-sharp beetle swarms that converged on the apex from multiple angles. The barrage would have annihilated a super-heavy tank squadron. The apex's response was to plant its feet and brace. The bioplasma washed over its armored hide, burning and eating through outer layers of scales. The beetle swarms burrowed into exposed flesh. Blue blood ran freely. But the creature didn't retreat. It absorbed the punishment while its dorsal plates began that now familiar critical buildup of energy. The carnifexes charged from the flanks, attempting to capitalize on the distraction. 3 reached the apex and began tearing at its legs with crushing claws, their enhanced strength finally finding purchase against the radiation-weakened armor. The apex's tail swept in a horizontal arc that pulverized 2 carnifexes instantly, but the third managed to bite down on the creature's thigh, penetrating deep into muscle tissue. The Hierophant pressed the advantage, firing another volley while advancing to close combat range. Then the Apex went supercritical. The transformation was instantaneous. The blue bioluminescence intensified to white-hot incandescence, the dorsal plates glowing like miniature suns. The atmospheric temperature spiked so rapidly that the air itself combusted in a sphere around the creature's body. The Venomthrope's toxic spores ignited mid-air. The Carnifex still attached to the Apex's leg burst into flames, its biomass consumed by heat that exceeded industrial furnace temperatures. The Hierophant, recognizing lethal threat conditions, attempted to retreat. It was far too slow. The Apex's atomic breath emerged not as a beam, but as an expanding cone of nuclear fury. The sustained discharge lasted 17 seconds. Crassus watched the chronometer with horrified fascination. And during that time, the temperature at ground zero exceeded 35,000 degrees. The Hierophant's armored carapace, refined across 1,000,000 years of evolutionary warfare, began to melt. Its biocannons exploded from internal pressure. Its limbs buckled as structural supports failed. The Bio-Titan collapsed to its knees, still attempting to regenerate, still obeying the hive mind's imperatives. The Apex advanced, each step sending cracks through heat-fractured bedrock. It seized the Hierophant's forward limbs and pulled. The sound of tearing chitin echoed across the battlefield. The Apex wrenched the limbs free with raw mechanical advantage, then drove them like spears through the Bio-Titan's cranial structure. The Hierophant spasmed once and went still, its connection to the hive mind severed. The Apex tilted its head back and roared, a sound of primal triumph that made every human on the planet feel their insignificance on a cellular level. But victory came at a cost. The creature was bleeding heavily from dozens of wounds. Its movements had lost some of their fluid grace, replaced by a slight hesitation that suggested pain or exhaustion. The sustained supercritical discharge had drained energy reserves that even its prodigious regenerative capabilities couldn't immediately replenish, and the hive mind, having witnessed the encounter through 1,000 compound eyes, was already adapting. Crassus watched the orbital augurs with growing dread as the main Hive Ship began a powered descent into the lower atmosphere. It was massive enough that its shadow covered 100 kilometers of surface area, and it bristled with bioweapons that could level continents. Behind it, escort organisms deployed in protective formations. "They're committing everything," Captain Dren said unnecessarily. Tech Adept Viridia's analysis scrolled across multiple displays. The Hive Ship is descending directly toward the Apex's position. Estimated time to engagement, 47 minutes. Additionally, detecting massive bioenergy buildup within the vessel itself. Hypothesis: the hive mind is preparing to deploy direct psychic assault in addition to physical engagement. Crassus made rapid calculations. The Apex had proven itself capable of killing anything the Tyranids sent against it through conventional deployment, but a Hive Ship represented orders of magnitude more threat. These vessels could birth new organisms mid-combat, adapt defenses in real time, and coordinate attacks with computational precision impossible for ground-level synapse creatures. And the Apex was wounded, irradiated to levels that should have killed it a dozen times over, operating in an environment that was fundamentally alien to its biology. "What's the evacuation status of Hive Primus?" Crassus asked. 17% complete, Lord General. We've moved 4 billion civilians into hardened shelters, but full evacuation would require 6 more weeks. 6 weeks they didn't have. If the Hive Ship won this engagement, Tertius Sigma would be stripped to bedrock within a month. If the Apex won, they'd have a nuclear-powered apex predator with no natural prey left, except 22 billion humans and whatever wildlife remained. "Continue evacuation operations," Crassus ordered, "and prepare the defense lasers for orbital engagement. If the Hive Ship commits to atmosphere, we hit it with everything we have the moment it shows vulnerability." "Sir, our weapons barely scratched it in orbital engagement," Dren protested. "I know, but if 2 Titans are going to fight for the fate of this planet, the Imperium of Man is going to make damn sure everyone knows we stood our ground." Crassus straightened his uniform and made the sign of the Aquila. "Besides, the Emperor protects those who protect themselves. Perhaps he sent us a weapon we didn't know we needed." On the tactical displays, the Apex had begun moving again despite its injuries, tracking toward the descending Hive Ship with that same relentless purpose. Its dorsal plates pulsed irregularly, fighting to maintain power output. Blood trailed behind it, glowing faintly blue in the gathering darkness. But it moved forward, always forward, toward the threat, toward the fight, toward what would either be its final stand or the moment it truly earned the title of king. The Hive Ship's descent transformed day into twilight. Its bulk occluded the sun, casting a shadow that stretched across 3 continents, while atmospheric friction superheated its outer carapace to incandescent temperatures. Lord General Crassus watched from the command bunker as the living vessel, officially designated Bioconstruct Omega by Imperial classification, maneuvered with impossible grace for something measuring 12 kilometers in length. Mass equivalent to a Gloriana-class battleship, Tech-adept Viridia reported, her mechadendrites trembling from processing overload. Bioenergy signatures indicate active organism generation within the vessel's internal chambers. The hive mind is breeding combat forms during descent. Additionally, psychic resonance is spiking. The ship itself is a synaptic amplification nexus. The Apex stood in the center of what had been the planet's largest agricultural zone, now a radioactive wasteland of glass and ash. Its wounds had partially healed through accelerated regeneration, but the cost showed in its posture, a slight favoring of its left leg, a slower respiratory rhythm visible in the rise and fall of its massive chest. The creature's eyes tracked the descending hive ship with undisguised focus. Crassus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. 2 entities evolved for absolute dominance, each recognizing the other as an extinction-level threat. There would be no territorial posturing here, no ritualized combat. One would die, the other would claim the planet. The hive ship halted its descent at 3,000 meters altitude, hovering through constant micro-adjustments of its gravity manipulation organs. The underside of the vessel split open along organic seams, and the deployment began. What fell from the hive ship's belly wasn't a wave of organisms, it was an avalanche. 200 gargoyle broods blackened the sky. 50 hive tyrants, each a tactical genius bred for battlefield command, descended on leathery wings. 30 Tyranid primes coordinated the swarm through synaptic links. And behind them came the true nightmare: 5 Harridan bio-titans and 3 additional hierophants, their armored carapaces reinforced beyond standard specifications. But the hive mind's true innovation wasn't in numbers. It was in the organism that descended last. The Dimmercharon was a living engine of slaughter, a bioconstruct designed specifically for killing other apex predators. Standing 40 meters tall with 4 sickle claws that could shear through tank armor, it was agile beyond reason for its size and possessed a regenerative factor that rivaled the apex's own. The hive mind had birthed it in response to the specific threat profile the apex represented. A hunter evolved in real time to kill a king. The apex's response was to charge. Despite its injuries, despite the overwhelming numbers arrayed against it, the creature broke into a ground-shaking sprint directly toward the descending swarm. Its dorsal plates flared to maximum intensity, and the atmospheric radiation levels climbed beyond catastrophic. Every step left glowing footprints in melted bedrock. The gargoyle broods dove first. Thousands of flying organisms attempting to overwhelm through sheer mass. The apex's atomic breath swept through them like a scythe through wheat, vaporizing hundreds with each sustained burst. But there were too many. They swarmed over the creature's body, claws finding purchase, bioweapons firing at point-blank range. The apex's response was to ignite its entire body. The electromagnetic pulse that erupted was visible as a sphere of distorted air expanding from the creature's form. Thousands of gargoyles fell with scrambled nervous systems, and those that survived the EMP found themselves caught in thermal updrafts hot enough to cook them mid-flight. The hive tyrants coordinated their assault with calculated precision, attacking from multiple vectors while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. Venom cannons pumped corrosive bioacid. Bone zords carved through armored hide. One hive tyrant managed to land on the apex's back and drive both blades deep between dorsal plates before the creature reached back with impossible flexibility and crushed the organism in its fist. But the assault was working. The apex was accumulating damage faster than its regeneration could compensate. Blue blood poured from dozens of wounds. A sustained barrage from 3 hive tyrants struck its left eye, and the creature roared in pain, a sound that shattered observation drones and registered as seismic activity. Then the hierophants engaged. The 3 bio-titans spread in a triangular formation, coordinating their fire to create an inescapable kill zone. Bioplasma and acid rounds converged from 3 directions simultaneously. The apex attempted to evade, but its injuries had cost it speed. The barrage caught it full force, and for the first time since its arrival, the creature was driven to one knee. The Dimmercharon struck like lightning given form. It closed the distance in seconds, its 4 sickle claws moving in a blur of razor-sharp chitin. The first strike carved through the apex's shoulder armor. The second opened its flank. The third and fourth targeted the creature's throat, attempting a decapitation strike. The apex caught 2 of the sickle claws in its jaws and bit down with jaw pressure that exceeded industrial hydraulics. chitin shattered. The Dimakaran shrieked, a sound of genuine pain, and attempted to pull back. The apex held firm, even as the other two claws continued their assault, and began to channel energy directly into the bioconstruct through the contact point. Blue-white light erupted from the Dimakaran's mouth and eyes, as atomic fire burned through its internal organs. But the hive mind had engineered this organism specifically for resilience. Redundant nervous systems kept it fighting. Redundant organs compensated for those destroyed. It continued its assault, even as its flesh burned from within. The two apex predators grappled in a death embrace, each attempting to overwhelm the other through sheer savage violence. The ground beneath them fractured under the stress. The Hierophants continued their bombardment, caring nothing for the Dimakaron's survival if it meant killing the apex. Crassus watched transfixed as the apex's dorsal plates began pulsing in an irregular pattern. Not the steady build-up of before, but something arrhythmic, almost desperate. The creature was dying, being worn down by attrition and coordinated assault. Then the pattern stabilized into a frequency Crassus's veteran instincts recognized, a critical mass cascade, the point where nuclear reactions become self-sustaining and exponential. All personnel, immediate evacuation from observation posts within 200 kilometers, Crassus ordered, his voice calm despite the ice in his veins. Now. Tech Adept Viridia's sensors screamed warnings. Energy buildup exceeding all previous measurements. Thermal output approaching. Emperor's throne, Lord General. It's going supercritical beyond designed parameters. This isn't controlled discharge, this is... The apex released the Dimakaran and threw its head back. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The Tyranids swarm hovering in anticipation, the bio-titans adjusting firing solutions, the Hive Ship's psychic presence pressing down like a physical weight. Then the creature began to burn. Not with blue-white fire, but with light joy that transcended visible spectrum, a radiance that forced every optical device to shut down or overload. The temperature at ground zero climbed past measurement capacity. The atmosphere itself ignited in a sphere that expanded at near supersonic velocity. The Dimakaron, caught at point-blank range, had time for its nervous system to register absolute agony before its biomass was reduced to constituent atoms. The Hierophants attempted to retreat, their enhanced survival instincts overriding tactical imperatives. But the thermal wave caught them. Their armored carapaces melted like wax, their internal organs flash-boiled. The remaining hive tyrants died screaming psychic death wails that astropaths felt across the system. The gargoyles simply ceased to exist, vaporized before their nerves could transmit pain signals. Every Tyranid organism within 100-kilometer radius died in less than 5 seconds. And at the center of the Holocaust, the apex stood wreathed in flames that would have made a star jealous. Its hide had taken on an incandescent quality, dorsal plates glowing with such intensity that they appeared to be made of solid light. The creature had achieved a state that defied biological classification. It had become a walking nuclear reaction, a living fusion furnace that burned with power drawn from sources Crassus couldn't begin to comprehend. The Hive Ship, hovering above the Inferno, finally recognized defeat conditions. Its bioweapons had proven insufficient. Its organisms were ash. The vessel began emergency ascent procedures, attempting to escape to orbital altitude where it could regroup. The apex wouldn't allow it. The creature's atomic breath emerged not as a beam or cone, but as a sustained column of thermonuclear plasma that reached from ground to sky like a pillar of divine wrath. It struck the Hive Ship's underside and punched clean through its armored carapace, burning through 6 kilometers of biomatter in seconds. Internal chambers ruptured, breeding vats exploded. The vessel's psychic scream was audible as a physical sensation, a psychic pressure wave that caused astropaths across Tertius Sigma to collapse bleeding from their eyes. The Hive Ship attempted to regenerate, its vast biomass redirecting resources to seal the breach. But the apex maintained the assault with implacable focus, pouring megaton upon megaton of thermal energy into that single point of failure. The ship's regeneration couldn't match the rate of destruction. Something inside the vessel detonated, perhaps a bioreactor, perhaps stored bioplasma reaching critical mass. The explosion was visible from orbit, a bloom of fire that illuminated half the planet's surface. The Hive Ship began to list, losing altitude, its gravity manipulation organs failing. It crashed 30 kilometers from the apex's position with an impact that registered as a magnitude 7.8 earthquake globally. The vessel's death throes killed billions of organisms still gestating in its chambers. Its psychic presence, which had dominated the planet's noosphere for days, went abruptly silent. The silence that followed was absolute. The apex stood at the center of a crater, measuring 40 kilometers in diameter. The ground beneath its feet, molten glass cooling to translucent crystal. Its body still glowed with diminishing radiance, the incandescent state slowly fading back to the familiar blue-white bioluminescence. Steam rose from its hide where cooling systems fought to regulate temperature. It was bleeding from 100 wounds, barely standing, operating on reserves that shouldn't exist. But it was alive, and the Tyranids were routed. Crassus watched the tactical displays update in real time. The remaining Tyranid bioships in orbit were breaking formation, executing emergency warp jumps without the usual coordination. The hive mind had recognized losing conditions and initiated fleet withdrawal. Scattered organisms across the planet's surface began exhibiting confused behavior. Without synaptic coordination, they were reduced to base instincts. "The swarm is broken," Captain Dren said, his voice filled with awe. One creature, one singular organism just broke a Tyranid Hive Fleet. Tech adept Viridia's mechanical components whirred as she processed data. Radiation levels planet-wide have reached Category 5 hazard status. Estimated decontamination timeline, 47 years without external intervention. Casualty projections from radiation exposure. 12 billion dead within 6 months, another 8 billion within 2 years. The atmospheric carbon content has increased 17% from biomass combustion. This planet is now officially a death world by Imperial classification standards. Crassus absorbed the numbers with the detachment of a soldier who'd made similar calculations 100 times. Tertius Sigma was dying. Not from Tyranid consumption, but from the collateral damage of its salvation. The choice had been between slow consumption and radioactive poisoning. Neither option was merciful. "What's the Apex doing?" he asked. Viridia adjusted sensor focus. "Moving northeast toward the coastline. Trajectory suggests it's heading toward deep ocean regions. Energy readings are declining. It appears to be seeking a recovery environment." The creature walked slowly now, each step measured and careful. It no longer radiated the same overwhelming presence. The battle had cost it dearly, but it moved with purpose, tracking toward water that might cool its overheated biology, toward depths where it could retreat and regenerate. Crassus made a decision. Pull all forces back to the Hive cities, establish contamination protocols, and begin distribution of anti-radiation medication to the civilian population. And send a message to Fleet Command. Tertius Sigma has been saved from Tyranid consumption, but at a cost that may exceed the planet's ability to sustain human life. "Should we attempt to track or engage the Apex, sir?" Dren asked. Crassus looked at the pict feed showing the creature's retreating form, still wreathed in fading light, still dangerous beyond measure, even in its wounded state. He thought about the 15 million guardsmen under his command, thought about the weapons that had proven utterly insufficient against either threat. "No," he said simply. "We leave it alone. It saved this world in its own terrible way. The least we can do is let it go in peace." The Apex reached the coastline as Tertius Sigma's sun set behind clouds of ash and radioactive particulate. It waded into the ocean, and the water flash-boiled around its body in vast clouds of steam. It continued walking until the water reached its chest, then its neck, then closed over its dorsal plates. The last thing visible was the faint blue glow beneath the surface, growing dimmer as the creature descended into depths that might offer respite from the brutal necessities of survival. Then even that light faded, and the king of monsters disappeared beneath the waves. 3 weeks after the Hive Fleet's retreat, Tertius Sigma existed in a state of twilight survival. The planet's population had been reduced from 22 billion to 19 billion through radiation exposure, secondary infections, and the collapse of agricultural infrastructure. Lord General Crassus stood on the observation deck of Command Bunker Alpha, watching ash fall like snow across what remained of Hive Primus. The sky maintained a perpetual grey haze, particulate matter from vaporized biomass mixing with radioactive isotopes in the upper atmosphere. The Imperium had responded with characteristic efficiency. 3 hospital ships had arrived in orbit, along with a Mechanicus salvage fleet eager to analyze both Tyranid and unknown biomatter samples. Inquisitor Vicarian of the Ordo Xenos had made planetfall 2 days prior. His questions pointed and his suspicions vast. The political machinery of the Imperium ground forward, demanding explanations for how a single unknown organism had accomplished what typically required sustained fleet-level bombardment. Crassus had provided his reports with clinical precision, knowing full well that his career would be judged on decisions made in circumstances no tactical manual had ever contemplated. But that was tomorrow's concern. Today, he had a more immediate problem. The Apex had not left the planet. Tech Adept Viridia's sensor network tracked it through a combination of radiation signature monitoring, seismic detection, and oceanic thermal anomaly analysis. The creature remained in the deep ocean trenches, approximately 7 kilometers below the surface, in a region where tectonic activity provided additional heat sources. It hadn't moved in 18 days, either recovering from injuries that would have killed any other organism 10 times over, or simply waiting. "Why doesn't it leave?" Captain Dren asked, voicing the question that haunted every strategic planning session. "It could return to wherever it came from. The dimensional rift that brought it here has stabilized. Our augurs detect intermittent warp space anomalies in the original arrival coordinates." Crassus studied the tactical displays showing scattered Tyranid organism concentrations across the planet. Without synaptic coordination, they devolved into isolated broods operating on instinctual behavior. The Imperial Guard had been systematically purging them for weeks. Dangerous work, but manageable compared to a coordinated swarm. "Because its work isn't finished," Crassus said quietly. "Look at the organism distribution pattern. 17 major concentrations, all near population centers or resource zones. The Apex killed the fleet, but the infestation remains. As long as Tyranid bioforms exist on this planet." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. The creature emerged from the ocean at dawn on the 23rd day. Coastal observation posts detected it first, a massive silhouette rising from the depths, water cascading off armored hide that had healed to near pristine condition. The wounds from the Hierophants and Dimmercharon had closed completely, leaving only faint scarring visible beneath regenerated scales. The dorsal plates pulsed with steady blue-white luminescence, their rhythm measured and controlled. The Apex stood in the shallows for several minutes, as if testing its own restored capabilities. Then it turned inland and began to move with the same methodical purpose that had characterized its initial campaign. But something had changed. The creature's movements were more precise, more calculated. It had learned the planet's geography. It knew where the threats remained. The first target was a Tyranid warren that had established itself in the ruins of Hive Secundus. An estimated 15,000 organisms, hormagaunts, termagants, and several Tyranid warriors had carved out a nest in the abandoned industrial sectors. The Imperial Guard had designated it for orbital bombardment, once civilian evacuation concluded in 6 weeks. The Apex arrived in 4 hours and demolished the warren in 20 minutes. No atomic breath, no critical mass cascade, just methodical surgical violence. It collapsed the warren's primary tunnels with seismic strikes, forced the organisms into kill zones, and eliminated them with precise applications of radiation and physical force. When it finished, no Tyranid bioform remained alive. Then it moved to the next concentration, and the next. "It's hunting," Inquisitor Vicarian observed, watching pig feeds from the command bunker alongside Crassus. The Inquisitor was a thin man with augmetic eyes that whirred constantly, processing data at inhuman speeds. Not defending territory, not responding to threats, actively hunting and eliminating every Tyranid presence on this planet. Why? Crassus asked, though he suspected he knew. Because that's what it is, Vakarian said, his tone carrying something approaching respect. An apex predator evolved, or created, to eliminate invasive species. The Tyranids triggered something fundamental in its biology. It won't stop until every last organism is dead. Over the following weeks, the Apex systematically purged Tertius Sigma of Tyranid infestation. It operated with increasing efficiency, learning to identify warren structures, to predict organism behavior, to minimize collateral damage while maximizing lethality. The Imperial Guard forces, initially wary of coordinating with an unknown Xenos entity, found themselves inadvertently working in parallel. The Apex would destroy major concentrations, and Guard units would sweep the surrounding territories for scattered survivors. No formal communication existed between Imperial forces and the creature, but patterns emerged. The Apex avoided populated areas unless Tyranid presence made engagement unavoidable. It didn't attack Imperial units, even when they operated within its proximity. Once, a Valkyrie squadron suffered engine failure and crashed 30 kilometers from the creature's position. Search and rescue teams found the survivors untouched, with the Apex having apparently moved around the crash site without investigating. "It's respecting our territory," Captain Dren observed during one strategic briefing. "Or at least, it's not viewing us as threats worth eliminating." Inquisitor Vakarian was less sanguine. "It's tolerating our presence because we're not competing for the same resources. The moment that calculation changes, we become targets like everything else." Crassus privately agreed, but he also recognized something in the creature's behavior that transcended simple predator-prey dynamics. The Apex was operating with strategic intelligence that suggested either sapience or instincts so refined they mimicked rational thought. It prioritized targets based on threat assessment, conserved energy between engagements, and adapted tactics to minimize exposure to danger. It was fighting a war, not just hunting prey. The final Tyranid concentration existed in the polar regions, a massive organism cluster that had burrowed into glacier systems, using the ice as both protection and thermal regulation. 30,000 organisms, including several carnifexes and a trigon, that had somehow survived the fleet's destruction. The Imperial Guard had designated it as a strategic threat requiring coordinated assault from 3 regiments. The Apex arrived first. The battle lasted 6 hours and was visible from orbit as thermal blooms melting millions of tons of ice. When it concluded, the polar region had been transformed into a boiling lake, steam rising kilometers into the atmosphere. The Tyranid presence had been completely eradicated. Not a single organism survived to flee or burrow deeper. Tech Adept Viridia's final analysis showed 0 remaining Tyranid biosignatures planet-wide. After 41 days of sustained operations, the infestation was gone. The Apex stood at the edge of the new polar lake, its body steaming in the frigid air. For the first time since its arrival, it had nothing left to hunt. The threat was eliminated. The planet was secured. Crassus watched through the satellite feeds as the creature's posture changed. The dorsal plates dimmed slightly, the aggressive readiness fading to something approaching. Satisfaction? Could something so alien experience satisfaction? Then the creature began walking toward the coordinates where it had first arrived. The crater that had been designated Landing Site Alpha in Imperial reports. It moved slowly, no longer tracking threats, simply traversing terrain with steady purpose. "It's going home," Captain Dren said, something like relief in his voice. The dimensional rift had remained stable throughout the campaign, a tear in reality that the Mechanicus had established permanent monitoring stations around. As the apex approached, the rift began to pulse with increasing intensity, as if responding to the creature's presence. Crassus gave an order he knew would haunt him. "All units, stand down. Do not approach within 50 kilometers of Landing Site Alpha. Let it go." Inquisitor Vicarian turned sharply. "Lord General, we have an opportunity to study an organism of unprecedented capability. The Adeptus Mechanicus could provoke a creature that destroyed a Hive Fleet," Crassus interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. "We've been given a gift, Inquisitor. A planet saved from consumption at costs we could never have paid ourselves. Whatever that thing is, wherever it came from, it fought our enemy when it had no obligation to do so. I will not repay that service with chains and vivisection." The Inquisitor's augmetic eyes whirred dangerously, but he said nothing. The political consequences would come later. For now, Crassus's authority held. The apex reached the crater at sunset, the fading light casting long shadows across the radioactive glass. The dimensional rift expanded, reality warping around its edges like heat shimmer. For a moment, the creature stood silhouetted against the anomaly, a king pausing at the threshold of departure. Then it stepped forward and vanished into light that hurt to perceive even through filtered feeds. The rift collapsed immediately, folding in on itself with a sound like tearing fabric amplified 1,000-fold. When the visual distortion cleared, nothing remained but the crater and the slowly settling dust. Silence filled the command bunker. "Radiation levels are declining," Viridia reported after a moment. "Not rapidly, but measurably. The Apex's departure has removed the primary emission source. Revised decontamination timeline, 32 years." Crassus nodded slowly. 32 years instead of 47. Still a death sentence for billions. Still a planet fundamentally changed. But alive. Still capable of supporting human life with the right investments in infrastructure and medical support. "Draft the final report," he ordered. Tertius Sigma successfully defended against Tyranid Hive Fleet Jormungandr through unconventional means. Recommend planetary reclassification from agri-world to mining world. The population reduction and radiation levels make agricultural production non-viable, but the ore deposits remain accessible. Request long-term medical support and decontamination resources. "And the apex, sir?" Captain Dren asked. "How do we classify it in the official record?" Crassus considered the question. How did one classify a force of nature that had walked among them for 6 weeks? How did one explain to the High Lords of Terror that a single organism had accomplished what fleets struggled to achieve? Unknown Xenos entity. Designation: Apex Alpha. Dimensional traveler. Engaged Tyranid forces as territorial defense response. Withdrew through dimensional rift upon threat elimination. Classification: extinct. No longer present in Imperium space. It was technically accurate, and it would satisfy the bureaucratic requirements while avoiding questions that had no good answers. Inquisitor Vicarian made a notation on his data slate, his expression unreadable. Crassus knew the Inquisitor would file his own reports, would probably recommend that Crassus be investigated for allowing a Xenos entity to operate unchallenged. But that was politics. That was the machinery of the Imperium grinding forward. Tonight, Crassus simply stood at the observation deck and watched ash fall across a world that had been given a second chance at survival. Somewhere in the depths of space, or perhaps in another dimension entirely, a king walked among stars, carrying with it the memory of a planet defended and enemies vanquished. The 41st millennium had witnessed many horrors and occasional miracles. For 41 days, Tertius Sigma had been blessed with both. The official Imperial records would list the defense of Tertius Sigma as a footnote: one world among millions, one Tyranid incursion among thousands. But those who survived would carry the memory like a scar. The day the sky split open and unleashed something that fought with the fury of dying stars. Lord General Crassus retired 3 years later with full honours, his career unmarred despite inquisitorial scrutiny. He never spoke publicly about the Apex, but those close to him noted he kept a small fragment of radioactive glass from Landing Site Alpha on his desk, a reminder that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources. Tertius Sigma survived. The population stabilized at 14 billion after the worst of the radiation sickness passed. The Mechanicus established mining operations that would run for centuries, extracting rare minerals from geology transformed by atomic fire. Children born in the years following the invasion showed unusual resistance to radiation, an evolutionary adaptation that scholars would study for generations. And in the deep places of the ocean, in trenches where sunlight never reached, trace radiation signatures occasionally flickered on long-range sensors. Nothing conclusive, nothing that warranted investigation, but enough to make mariners whisper stories of blue light glimpsed in stormy waters, of shapes too massive to be natural moving beneath the waves. Perhaps some essence of the creature remained, bound to the world it had defended. Perhaps it was merely residual contamination playing tricks on instruments and imaginations. The Imperium, with its million worlds and endless wars, had no resources to spare investigating ghost stories. But on quiet nights, when ash no longer fell and the stars shone clear above reclaimed cities, some looked to the sky and wondered. The universe was vast beyond comprehension. Dimensions layered upon dimensions, realities stacked like cards in an infinite deck. If something could fall through once, drawn by the psychic screaming of a Hive Fleet's hunger, what else might be out there, waiting? What other kings walked among stars, content to sleep until their ancient instincts called them to wake and fight once more. The Imperium of man had survived 10,000 years by assuming every Xenos entity was hostile, every unknown a threat to be eliminated or enslaved. Tertius Sigma had learned a different lesson, that sometimes the universe was strange enough and brutal enough, and occasionally merciful enough to send help from sources too alien to understand. The apex had come, it had fought, it had won, and then it had left, asking nothing, demanding nothing, content to return to whatever reality had birthed it. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there was only war, Tertius Sigma had witnessed something rarer than victory. They had witnessed majesty in its purest form, terrible and beautiful and utterly indifferent to human comprehension. The Tyranids would return someday, they always did. But those who remembered would face that darkness with a strange comfort. They had seen an apex predator operate at full capacity, had witnessed what happened when an unstoppable force met something genuinely immovable. And they had learned that in a universe of horrors, sometimes the greatest monsters fought for reasons beyond hunger or conquest. Sometimes they simply fought because that was what kings did.